Hi guys, just ignore this stuff up here. We are going to talk about, just give you some examples with this quadratic formula stuff that we're talking about. So I wanted you to remember our little song, x equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So remember that all over part, so that when you're doing this in the right order, you make sure that you get it in the right order. So in this equation, we have our coefficients. Remember that it's the coefficients only, not the x's. So a, b, and c are going to give us 2, 5, and negative 3. So x is going to equal the opposite of b, which is negative 5, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 25, minus 4 times 2 times negative 3. All divided by 2 times 2. Please remember that in this area right here, finding that discriminant is going to be of paramount importance that you follow your order of operations. So x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. And then here, you do that, divided by 4. So x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 49. And good for us, 49 is a perfect square. Divided by 4 equals negative 5 plus or minus 7 divided by 4. So now we got to separate them out. So I'm going to do one here. X equals negative 5 plus 7 divided by 4, which is 2 over 4, or 1/2. So we end up with one solution of x equals 1/2. Then I'm going to do the other one down here. X equals negative 5 minus 7 divided by 4 is negative 12 divided by 4, or negative 3. So that means our other solution is x equals negative 3. So these would be the two solutions to this quadratic equation. Okay, this one's just a touch different in that we do not have it equal to 0. And if you remember, our standard form has to be equal to 0. So I need to subtract 20 from both sides. I do not have a common constant over here to combine it with. So I am going to subtract it anyway. 2x squared plus x minus 20 equals 0. And now I can come in and I can do, this is A, this is B. If I don't see it, that's B, that's C. So I end up with 2, 1, and negative 20. So when I put it into my quadratic formula, I'm going to come over this side, I get x equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 1 minus 4 times 2 times negative 20, all over 2 times 2. Make sure you're doing what's in here correctly. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times negative 20 is negative 160. Okay? And that makes that plus all over 4. So this doesn't look like it's going to be very pretty. X equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 161. That doesn't quite work. Square root of 161 isn't an integer. So this means it's going to be irrational. It's not a perfect square. So that means I'm going to need to put it into my calculator in the right way to come up with what this answer is. So again, my solutions, maybe two of them, x equals negative 1 plus the square root of 161 over 4, and x equals negative 1 minus the square root of 161 over 4. So when I go into my calculator to do this, this is exactly what I am going to have to do. And let's see, get answers down here. Okay, so I end up with negative 1 plus the square root of 161. Find out that first, and then divide that by 4, and I get 2.92. And then I'm going to do -1 minus the square root of 161. Find out what that is, and divide it by 4. And I end up with that. So I get 2.92 and -3.42. So x equals 2.92. What was that other one? -3.42. Please don't put this into your calculator. Don't round until the very last step. I'm going to put this in red. Don't round until the last step. All right? So put it in just like that, and then round it off at the very end, last stop. Only round once, round at the end. That's your mantra, always. So that's how you do this. If you end up with something that's not a perfect square, I don't get integer answers. That happens way more frequently than coming up with ones that are. Those were contrived situations usually where we have something that is just making it work. So I'm going to erase this because I want to go up to the next one, and that's not going to happen. I don't be able to write, so I'm going to erase all of this. I'll always go back and look at it again later. And then we have this next one here. This one's already equal to 0, so I'm good that way. So my A, B, and C is 1, 8, and 24. Okay? Remember, if you don't see it, it's a 1. So x is going to equal -8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 4 times 1 times 24. All over 2 times 1. So doing my discriminant now, remember the discriminant is what's underneath your square root sign. -8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 96, positive 96. Divided by 2. Well, what happens here is this right here is negative. You cannot take the square root of a negative number, so I have no solutions for this one. No solutions for this one because I end up with a negative 64 minus 96 is a negative number. Negative 32 to be exact. So that's not going to work. So this one is an example of what you might see when you have no solution. So now as I scroll up to one more, get rid of all of this. There we go. Last problem. This one, again, not equal to 0. So I'm going to have to make it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 6x and add 1. So I get 9x squared minus 6x plus 1 equals 0. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, I can't factor that. At least I don't know how to factor that because my 9 is not a 1, so I'm not sure what to do. So I'm going to use quadratic formula again, see what happens. I have 9, negative 6, and 1. 9, negative 6, 1. So x equals opposite of b. This is b, right? So 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times 9 times negative 1. Well, something looks like it's going to happen here. Minus 2 times 9, divided by 2 times 9. So x equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. This should be a positive one, sorry. 36 minus 36, and that's 0. So x equals 6 plus or minus 0. That part just cancels out. Divided by 18. Only one solution. That's an important thing to remember. My discriminant is 0, so there's one solution. You can't just leave it at that, though. You've got to tell me what the solution is. So my x equals 1/3, which means on the graph, if I was to graph this, this is 1, and I have, so it's just going to sit my x-axis at 1/3. So that's what that means, I only have one solution, and that's what it ends up being. And so hopefully this will help, hopefully this will work, and we can work on what's going to happen when you get back and try these. Please take a look at these. Khan Academy will also help, but I hope this little 10-minute video gives you some assistance with using quadratic formula, especially on those 3 that you have to do in number 2 in the notes for your homework. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.